Uh, this is the Dry Pink Dialogue, second episode in as many minutes, hours. This is going to be the midweek episode for this week. For those of you that just watched the game recap, we did some awards, and I thought that was a fitting and positive way to end the Club World Cup. We talked last Thursday. We did sort of a grateful for everything episode, and I was really happy we did that because I thought this was a huge moment for Inter Miami, and I thought what they were doing was so spectacular that if we waited to digest it until the whole thing was over, we wouldn't have felt as good about it. And so I thought it was worth doing that episode then. And so I think we got a lot of our thoughts about the tournament as a whole out there. And I don't know if this game against PSG really changed much. And so that's why I thought we were pretty comfortable doing shorter episode on the game recap. And then we can just sort of get into what the Club World Cup means for Inter Miami. How are we feeling about this tournament and all of that jazz? But I will start by saying, Saur, my friend, my co-host, how are you feeling since the last time we saw you 4 minutes ago?
This feels weird. My brain can't recalibrate that quickly, and I can't think on my toes. So for me, I'm still stuck in the last video. But we're back, and now we look forward. We've done a lot of talking about what happened in the last 2 weeks, about the last month almost in preparation for the Club World Cup. Honestly, I can't believe that we're done with it. It's in the past now. We kept talking about how we're going to come to the Club World Cup. And now we look forward again to the MLS because that's now the most important thing for Inter Miami until the next tournament starts. So it feels weird, man. We're going to have to go back to talking about Atlanta and Montreal and New England. And
I know.
It's going to be an interesting pre-game preparation for us again.
I was definitely thinking that the Club World Cup has spoiled me. The grandeur and excitement of that tournament isn't going to make playing in Montreal this weekend quite as fun.
You know what I'll miss the most?
The white and gold.
The white and gold graphics, absolutely, but also game starting on time. I got used to games starting on time, and I almost always was late in the games. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm going to miss the most. Because the MLS doesn't start until like 15, 20 minutes after the promised time. So
it's, for the record, for anyone that doesn't realize this yet, it's exactly 10 minutes after it says it's supposed to.
Yeah.
They are absolutely on time internally. They just lie to us and tell us it's going to start 10 minutes before it actually will. Okay, so turning the page. Club World Cup, I thought was a lot of fun. I'm incredibly glad that Inter Miami was a participant. I thought they did incredibly well. Like, proud, all that stuff. Now we're back to real life, and that's the MLS. It's the Supporter Shield. It's the MLS Cup. It's the Leagues Cup. It's next year's CONCACAF Champions Cup and qualifying for that. It's the summer transfer window. It's all of that stuff. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, there is something going around today that I think we should address. And that's this Lionel Messi thing about him potentially leaving for another club. It's nonsense, in my opinion, still. I don't know if you feel differently. I see the people out there. He's going to be here. And I'm happy to tell you guys why in a second, but it's just nothing about my opinion on that has changed, regardless of how many random sports writers are tweeting about it.
This is the Inter Miami Messi era. He's not going anywhere. And for all it's worth, I think these are all efforts by news writers, by journalists, by fans to just get some clicks and get some traction going because Inter Miami and Messi sells. But I think Messi's here for this entire project. And this, for my opinion, is going to be the last team that Messi plays professional football for. I think he's going to retire here. When that's going to happen, I'm not sure, but I think this is it. Messi is going to stay at Inter Miami and finish his career at Inter Miami.
Yeah, guys, here's the thing. He's going to become an owner of Inter Miami, part owner of Inter Miami. And if he leaves here in a negative way, then that's going to be untenable. And I think there's always going to be a bad relationship between the fans in him if he leaves on a negative, especially because I understand the accomplishments seem phenomenal compared to what we were doing before, but like I also think people aren't going to look at the Lionel Messi era as a success unless there is an MLS Cup or a CONCACAF Champions Cup or whatever. And so he wants to make sure the stadium is valuable. He wants to make sure the team is valuable, all that stuff, because it's going to support him and his business interests moving forward. So this is the last cup he's going to play for. If that changes, it's because something with his plan to become a part owner has changed, in my honest opinion, or he decides to retire early. But he's not going to play for another team. So I'll be shocked when it happens, but
If it
I don't see it
happens.
happening. Like if that were to happen, I would be shocked. But I just don't see it. Did we address it enough? I mean, it's Lionel Messi, so it's probably worth addressing. But
Yeah, we don't want to fuel the fire at all.
well, maybe we were about to fuel the fire in a different way. Here's my statement. I think we just saw the peak of the Lionel Messi era. I think that Club World Cup, and the reason why I wanted to enjoy it so much while it was happening, and I wanted to make sure we got on live to talk about it, is because I think that was the peak. If you want to argue that it was the League's Cup or the Supporter Shield, that's fine. But I don't think it's going to get any better from here. The roster situation is becoming more difficult to manage. Lionel Messi, I think we're starting to see him struggle with the physicality. And what I mean by that is when he is 100%, he's the best player. But we saw him go full effort for 2 games in a row, and then he couldn't go full effort for a third game. And so when we're talking about a League's Cup, when we're talking about pushing to win the Supporter Shield at the end of the table, at the end of the season, we're talking about an MLS Cup Finals run, when we're talking about next year's CONCACAF Champions Cup, like I think getting 4, 5, 6 games in a row of Messi's absolute best is unrealistic at this point. I think Suarez and Busquets and Alba are starting to drop a little bit with their consistency and their ability to impact the game. And I think the rest of the roster was blessed in a way that if you came with Messi, it's hard to understand, but we had something of a golden generation come through the academy. And those guys are going to start either moving on or getting paid in ways that are going to make it difficult to keep the rest of the roster together. We had, and you can add Leo Alfonso and Yannick Bright as super draft picks to that. Like incredibly lucky that we were able to find impactful players out of the super draft that could impact the team in this way. And so I don't think that this is going to get better. Now that doesn't mean they can't put something together for a couple weeks, but I think, and to add to that, I think they've made their bed with the coaching decision, and I don't think he's going to pull something out of this team that isn't already there. And so I think that was the best of the Messi.
You were not kidding when you said that this was going to be a depressing episode. Boy, that was a way to start. The only way this can be topped is if we win the CONCACAF Champions Cup next year. And I don't know how that happens with the current roster. I think this was phenomenal. This was amazing.
This was great too.
Brilliant.
Like that's
I think we went into this hoping that Inter Miami doesn't get embarrassed in the global stage. And when those expectations are so low and you almost reach to the opposite side of your expectations where we're at the pinnacle of excitement seeing Inter Miami play against some of these big teams, beating some of these big teams. I think that cadence between going from an utter low and no expectations to the best of highs is, I think, the best swing possible. We're probably going to go into the League's Cup thinking we're the favorites or we should win. CONCACAF Champions Cup is too far ahead to think about, but if we make it to the playoffs, Inter Miami will want to win the playoffs. So the expectations are now going to be high, and if we don't perform well, then it's going to be disappointing. And if we do perform well, then we'll feel happy, but it's not going to be the same level of emotional swing. This was an emotionally turbulent and fun and exciting tournament where we experience everything together as a fan base. And I think that in itself definitely makes it the peak of the Inter Miami Messi era so far.
No, but like for me, I think that was it. Um, like I would be shocked if this team can
Replicate.
do that. Yeah, and that doesn't mean they can't win the MLS Cup, but I don't think they're ever going to dominate their way to an MLS Cup. I don't think they're going to dominate their way to the Supporter Shield, where they are considered the absolute favorites to win everything. Like I think that's where we were at last year in September. Like it felt like Inter Miami was destined to do all of these great things, and they were the favorites to do all these great things. And by the way, they were deserved to be the favorites to do all these great things. Like, I don't think that's where we're going again. Um, Part of that's the coaching staff. Part of that's the inability to bring through players onto the roster that are going to be meaningfully impactful. Um, we've talked a lot about Neymar and Angel Di Maria as like potential options, but like if you told me one of those types of players was going to come and maybe that would rejuvenate everything, I think that's potentially possible. But I think now like all of Messi's friends are at the point where they're not going to do that anymore. So yeah, I think that was it, and I get that's incredibly negative, but that's been on my chest for the last 6 weeks. And listen, 6 weeks ago we were talking about Inter Miami losing 3-0 to Orlando City, and we should fire Javier Mascherano. And it feels like the last 6 weeks has been a Club World Cup blur, where Messi sort of pulled this team into solid form in the last 3 MLS games. They were phenomenal in the Club World Cup, and I think the energy, the enthusiasm, the motivation, the stamina, it's going to drop in a big way. I think it's going to hit Inter Miami coming up in the next few weeks, and that'll lead us into our next topic. But um, like I'm prepared for that as an Inter Miami fan.
Yeah, it's almost like we made the deal with the devil that if we perform well in the Club World Cup, anything that's forthcoming in the MLS is going to be dangerous. I think we've exhausted a lot of our resources. We've put in a lot of effort. The players have done really well to get to the stage that they did in the Club World Cup and put on the performances that they did. But I think it's slightly unsustainable. And now it might come back to hurt us in the MLS. We can talk a little bit more about it. But I think when you reach that emotional, physical peak, you have to come back from it. And it's bound to be a little bit of a reverb. So we'll see how this plays out in the MLS. But I think I understand where you're coming from when you say that we may not get the same level of Inter Miami high in the MLS moving forward, at least for the next couple of months, as we did in the Club World Cup.
Yeah, I think this team, as constructed, has sort of hit its limits.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into what's coming up next. Inter Miami is getting set to play Montreal this weekend. As weird as that sounds, that's the case. And then the following Wednesday, they're going to play New England, and then they're going to play Nashville the following weekend, then Cincinnati the following midweek, and then New York Red Bulls the following weekend. So you're going to play 5 games in the next 2.5 weeks. Then you get a week off, and then the Leagues Cup starts. Like this team it's hurting. It doesn't have the depth that we thought it was going to at the beginning of the season. I think moving on Robert Taylor and Julian Gressel, especially Robert Taylor, really hurts. The intensity of those last 4 games, the group stage games, I thought really took a toll on Inter Miami. We saw Lionel Messi not being at 100% against Palmeiras. Ian Frey gets hurt. Noah Allen gets hurt. It would not surprise me if we're not going to see a ton of Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez over the next couple of weeks, just for load management, minutes management. I think now for them, it's like get into the playoffs and then try and ramp it back into gear is what this season's looking like. And if that's the case, then, we're not looking at Supporter Shield. We're not looking at the Leagues Cup. We're hopefully in a position to make a run so we can qualify for CONCACAF Champions Cup next year, but I don't think that's guaranteed. I think we're 11 points back on Philadelphia at the moment. I know we have 4 games in hand, or 3 games in hand on them, 4 games in hand on many teams, but Like just considering how many games this team has played, the lack of trust, I think, in the depth of this roster that on paper we looked at and we thought that could be really exciting. Guys like Alan Obando, Leo Alfonso, um, uh, you know, guys that are deeper in the roster that haven't gotten a ton of run this season. That doesn't appear to be something that Javier Mascherano really wants to work with. So I think this team's going to struggle by the standards that Javier Mascherano, that Inter Miami set last season. And if that's the case, like we're going to be saying we're the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference or the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. Can they whip it together to go on a run in the MLS Cup playoffs? And if not, then what are we even talking about in terms of success this season?
We're coming off of a journey where Inter Miami really had to pull together its resources to perform well. There are a couple of points that you just made, I think, that we need to stretch out a little bit more. We're going to play, I think, 6 games over the next 20 days, depending on how some of the games that we missed get rescheduled. It may be more, it may be 7 before the League's Cup, I believe. That is a lot of pressure on a team that is lacking the depth, a team that is suffering from injuries. Even towards the end of the Club World Cup, in the Palmeiras game, in the PSG game, you could see these players were struggling. In that Palmeiras game, they were falling like flies. Redondo had cramps, Noah Allen, Oscar Ustari. They were all struggling for physicality. And I think Inter Miami expended a lot of energy, mental, physical, in trying to get the result that they wanted at the Club World Cup. And for anyone who's expecting this to be a juggernaut that is buoyed up by the positive performances and just takes the momentum into the MLS season, I think this conversation is sort of trying to temper those expectations. We're not going to be this juggernaut that rolls into the MLS and then runs over every single team that we see just because we were able to play against some of the big teams in the Club World Cup. I think Inter Miami is really going to struggle. You mentioned that Javi Mascherano did not necessarily use some of its depth pieces that well. He didn't use any of the depth pieces at all. I think we relied on our starting 11 or a group of, let's say, 13, 14 players.
I'm talking about going back to the MLS calendar.
Yeah,
Earlier in the year.
So we relied on the group of 13 players for the entirety of the Club World Cup. And nothing tells me that going back into the MLS, Javi Mascherano is going to rely on the broader roster to get past this next phase of games where we need to maybe rest some of our superstars. A lot of these players have barely played any minutes from the bench. Baltazar Rodriguez, Alan Abondo, Fafa Pico. We have injuries to Ian Frey, Yannick Bright. We've only basically relied on 2 or 3 players coming off the bench, and then that's it. So if you expect Inter Miami to perform at that same level, playing 5 games, 6 games, 7 games in less than a month, I think that's not possible and that's unsustainable. So we might get a really big reality check going into the next phase of our season where we're back in the MLS and trying to compete. The physicality is going to be up there. And Inter Miami is going to have to find a way to win games because we're already 3-4 games behind, 11 points away from Philadelphia. We lose any one of them, the distance increases more and more. Yes, our expectations maybe not to finish in the Supporters Shield spot, but maybe top 4. Even then, we're playing Cincinnati twice in the next month. That itself is a big, big game, or big ties, both of them. And it's going to be really hard for Inter Miami to swing the other way and make sure they compete in the MLS at the highest level and win game after game after game. I don't think it's possible. If we do it, it's a miracle. But I think with the way the squad has been stretched out, Suarez is struggling, Messi is struggling physically, Jordi Alba is coming back from an injury. We've got so many injuries across the board. Drake Callender is nowhere to be seen. So I think we're looking very, very thin in terms of reinforcements. And unless we pull out a miracle in the transfer window, I don't see how we're capable of winning that many games back to back. It's going to be a grueling, grueling schedule going forward.
Well, we'll talk about the transfer window in a few minutes. Yeah, there's just a lot of games, and listen, again, the next 3 weeks, starting Saturday, it's the 3 weeks, 5 games. I'm sorry, 2.5 weeks, 5 games. Messi's not going to, he might come off the bench in 3 of them. Same thing with Suarez. He might not play in 2 of them, etc. So this team is going to have to find ways to get points when they don't have their best player. And then you're talking about relying on Javier Mascherano to scheme you up points. And I don't have a lot of faith in that happening. So this team to me is like, are they going to be driven at their very best by Lionel Messi? And if they are, then they can win anything. But if they're not, like, I don't think this is even a particular, like, I think this is a maybe make the playoffs type team without that. Now that's going to be there some of the time. And so they'll get into the playoffs, but I think you're talking about third, fourth, fifth, sixth place in the Eastern Conference, not qualifying for the CONCACAF Champions Cup next year through the Supporter Shield table, relying on something like the Leagues Cup or potentially the MLS Cup finals. So it's a tough situation. I really think that.
Just to contextualize this, I think give a visual representation of what we're facing. Right now, we only have 2 senior center backs fully fit who might have to play the next 4 games.
And one of them is going to get suspended after 2 of them.
Ian Frey's out. Noah Allen's out. David Martinez doesn't play for this club anymore. Gonzalo Lujan has been injured for a while. Maxi Falcone and Toto Aviles are the only 2 center backs we have available right now. And we're going to be playing games back to back to back.
Well, they have Ryan Saylor, of course.
We have Ryan Saylor, of course, who hasn't played a single minute since preseason. So,
hey, he got 4 minutes off the bench against Columbus in a 5-1 win.
If that's not a thin squad, I don't know what is. You don't have any backup for Jordi Alba anymore. He's the only left back on this team right now. Yannick Bright might come back from injury, but he still needs time to get back into gameplay, game state. Midfielder-wise, we basically only have Redondo and Busquets and Kramaski in the middle. Allende and Segovia have played basically every single game over the last 3 months. I don't know how we're going to replace that. So this squad is stretched thin. That's how I want to finish this conversation or asterisk this conversation.
And to that, the other part of that is, I think there was some incredible performances by certain players in the Club World Cup that I do not see translating at all.
I don't
into the
either.
MLS. I don't think Chelo Wiegand is going to be any better of a player than what we thought he was 6 weeks ago. Oscar Stadi, I don't think he's a better player than we thought he was 6 weeks ago. Federico Redondo, I don't think he's a better player than what we thought he was 6 weeks ago. Baltasar Rodriguez, I think, in the way that he's been treated, makes me think that they don't think he's like a complete difference maker right away. So it's nice to add a piece that you can use. Obviously, we'll get David Ruiz and Yannick Bright back, but you're right. Like, this is a team very much stretched thin, and the guys that we relied on through the Club World Cup I don't expect them to take their game to a new level heading into the MLS regular season. I don't think this is some sort of confidence boost to Oscar Stari that he's going to carry on to win Goalkeeper of the Year. I talked about Segovia on the last episode as being a guy, now that we're finding where he fits on the field, that may be the one real boost I see from this roster, but that's it. That's all I see. And now we're going to get into this in a few minutes, 20 minutes or so. My faith in the front office and coaching staff to bring in the pieces that they need is very low. And we're going to go into more details there as we talk about some of these player salaries. But I think this is a messy. So many people from outside of Miami will say things like, oh, it's just Messi carrying an old team or whatever. And I haven't felt like that's been true for much of the Messi era. Like, last year didn't feel like that if you were really paying attention. But I feel like that's where we're heading. And I don't even want to put Messi in a position where he has to do that game in and game out. That's just unfair to him. So I'm very pessimistic about what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think we were playing in a very specific context where we were playing a specific ilk of teams, and we managed to find a way to win. And I think being the underdog sort of suited us, and the narrative sort of worked in our favor. we're going to go back to the MLS where come Montreal, we're supposed to win that game. We're supposed to dominate that game. We're supposed to take that game to Montreal. And you're going to have to do that for the next 7 games, back to back to back to back to back. Long story short, I don't know if we have the resources or the players to do this anymore, at least for the next 2 months.
Yeah. Did I paint a negative enough picture?
I think more than negative. We're almost whispering into our mics out of fear of the negativity that we're spreading across the fan base.
The next question I have written down is is this team prepared to dominate the MLS? Listen, that's what they did last year, right? That's the standard. They were the best team in the league, bar none. And they had a few upsets that cost them a couple trophies, but they broke the points record, and they did it both with and without Messi, right? They had the same number of points when he was out than when he was there. And Luis Suarez was incredible, and Julian Gressel was incredible. Matthias Rojas, like so many players were so good and stepped up in such important moments that they were able to really be the best team in the MLS. And Tata Martino still got fired for it. Like that's the standard that we should have come to expect from this Inter Miami team heading into 2025, where they thought they got better as a team. Like they thought they fixed the center back depth chart. Like they thought they fixed it. They thought they were going to be better in the midfield. Now that Yannick Bright had a whole season, they thought Telasco Segovia was going to be a big player. They thought all these wingers that were actually midfielders, that was going to be a scheme that just set them into domination mode. Whatever it was, the standard was super high. And it feels impossible for them to reach it again.
I think the one way Inter Miami actually dominated the MLS last season, or at least was close to dominating the MLS last season, set the points record, was touted as one of the best rosters ever constructed, was not because of his superstars. The one thing that stood out was the depth of this team, and you've already alluded to this. The reason we were able to go that far in the MLS was because even with our superstar players out, Inter Miami was still able to win games. We had the quality across the bench when anyone could come and change the game. Julian Gressel had a good run of games. Matthias Rojas had game-changing moments. We were a true juggernaut at that time with a lot of depth. In tournaments, you don't necessarily need that depth because you can play 3 games and play the same team because you're almost in a bubble mindset where you just play your best team every single game so that you can progress as far as possible. But if you want to dominate the MLS, and to answer your question, you need a deep squad where every single player is able to do a role. When you need to rest your superstar players, somebody who comes in, fine, the quality may not be the same, but they're still good enough to get you a result. You don't lag behind. It's the bench players that count in the MLS. Why do some of the teams struggle so much in the MLS when it comes to dominating through and through? Because they have a good set of starting 11 players, but then one player gets injured and they don't necessarily have the replacement. Their star player gets injured and they're unable to produce the same performances game in and game out. So to dominate, you need the bench strength, the depth to be able to do that. I think Inter Miami doesn't have that anymore. There's a lot of question marks about where some of these players fit when it comes to actually playing every single game in game, every single week, game in, game out. And I don't know if we have the same level of quality depth that we used to. I think the starting 11 is fantastic. The starting 11 that played in the game against Palmeiras, that won the game against Porto, I think will still be able to put on a show against any MLS side. But if 2 of them get injured, where do you replace them from? You don't have the proven players to do that for you right now.
Well, and
that's where we struggle.
Our best 11 is not as good as it was last year either.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not.
Like Tadeo Allende is not as good as Diego Gomez, and there is no Matthias Rojas on this team, and
I think Segovia is the only one that I've actually not changed my mind about that, but who I think is rising in the stock in terms of where he fits in this Inter Miami team. The rest of the players, I agree with you, they're not nearly as good as the team that we had last year, even in the starting 11.
and then you talk about a step back from Suarez and from Alba and from Busquets, and so it becomes very, very difficult. I don't think our goalkeeping play is better. It's on par with what we had last season, and we are going to talk about that again in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Um, the other thing is, you mentioned that you need depth. You can get away with not having depth if you really push your stars to their limits. And that's not what Inter Miami's going to do. Messi's not going to play 34 games, 90 minutes every game like Lucho Costa may have 3 years ago for Cincinnati, or a Hani Mukhtar 4 years ago for Nashville, Carlos Heel 5 years ago for the New England Revolution. Like, that's not what Messi wants to do. It's not what Inter Miami wants from Messi. Like, they should have built a team that didn't need that from him, and they had been very successful in doing that last season. So, yeah, I just don't think I think the dream and not even the dream, the expectation, the standard that they set last year is out of reach for this team, and I'll be very surprised if they can hit it. And then the other thing that sort of permeates over this whole conversation that we haven't really dove into yet is, if you don't have your superstars both playing and playing well, you do have to rely on your depth, and you do have to rely on a bunch of pieces. You need a coach that's going to put those pieces in a position to help you get results. And Inter Miami they don't have that. Like, wherever you are at with Javier Mascherano after this tournament, he's not a coach that's going to win you games based on what he decides. He relies on the talent to get results. And he's made a number of mistakes. He's not almost like, it's not like everything he's done has been terrible, but he's certainly been worse than what we had last year. And like, if you're telling me that Javier Mascherano has to coach us to 9 points over our next 5 games, and Messi's only going to play 2 of them, I don't see how that's going to happen, if I'm being blunt.
And Tata Martino found a way to win games when Messi wasn't available. He found a strategy. He found a starting 11 that could play that style, and he dug down, he dug deep, and he was able to get something out of the squad. I hate to say this, but Gonzalo Lujan is going to be back soon, and I can guarantee you, I bet you right now that Javier Marchand is going to start him the moment he's available to play a full 90-minute game. 100%. Regardless of how the rest of the squad is playing. And that, for me, hasn't changed after the Club World Cup. He's still going to make those decisions. He still has a set of players that he will rely on. He didn't utilize his full roster at all in the Club World Cup, and that's okay. That was a different circumstance. That was a different reality that we were in. But going back into the MLS, I'm afraid that Inter Miami will return to the form that we had 3-4 weeks ago. Yes, we were able to win the last couple of games, but I think that was when Messi started to hit his peak and realized things are not falling into place. And it was him that was doing the uplifting and not Javier Mascherano.
And I think they knew, like, we have to get ourselves into form for this tournament. Like, I think that was like, we got to put extra effort in now so that we're ready for this tournament. I think that is gone. Like, I kind of expect to see us go back to right where we were at before that Philadelphia game, where we lost 5 of our last 7 and only had 1 win. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens, because there's just so much in terms of like the overarching themes of this team that just do not fill me with confidence. So many mistakes that are made sort of at fundamental institutional levels that make me think this team doesn't have much that they can pull together without Messi, just from a captain's perspective and from an energy and effort perspective, saying, I'm going to put this team on my back and we're going to go do it. Because if that doesn't happen, this team hasn't looked very good for much of this season, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah, I agree with you. And when you talk about reaching the peak, I think it might get really bad over the next couple of months. So I'm glad we were able to enjoy this, and I can look back on this time as a fun time during the summer.
And that's why we did the podcast last Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into the rosters, the salaries that came out from the MLSPA, because I think this will inform a lot of our frustrations and put, I think, some reasoning behind why we're frustrated, and some reasoning why, what the club was thinking. I think we've learned a lot from this salary dump. So I think it's worth looking into. And I think it will inform a lot of what we've talked about, if I'm being honest. Let's start, because I keep teasing it, with Oscar Stadi. He came in last summer as an absolute throwaway ad. They bought international roster slot in the summer that they were planning on using on a center back, and the deal for the center back fell through. And so at the very end of the summer window, when they didn't have anything else lined up and they just had an international roster slot waiting for them, they brought in Oscar Stadi, who was an old friend of Lionel Messi. It made sense. I believe Ciro dos Santos may have been hurt, which ended up ending his season. He may have about to have been gotten hurt. Grammar's out the window, but it made sense because you had an international roster slot. You had a little bit of cap space. Why not just bring in a backup goalkeeper that is going to fit into the culture? He's a veteran, can't hurt. There's no way this is going to hurt. They signed him to a new contract that's paying him $744,000 for a goalkeeper. He's maybe the seventh highest paid player on the team. He's making more than Hugo Lloris, who is a World Cup champion, is making for LAFC. They signed him in January. No, here's the statement. To be the starting goalkeeper. He's making $300,000 more than Drake Callender. They signed him to be the starting goalkeeper. They gave him the biggest goalkeeper contract in the history of Inter Miami. And this guy's 38, 39 years old. They've already given him an extension for next season under absolutely no pressure. And I want to be clear about something. The goalkeeping play this year has been no better than last season. Oscar Stadi has had some phenomenal moments, and I am not taking that away from him. I'm not taking that away from him at all. He was incredible in the last 15 minutes against LAFC in that second leg of the CONCACAF Champions Cup. He was great against Al Ahly. I mean, in this tournament, he was phenomenal. But over the course of the season, the play from the goalkeeping spot has been the same as last season. Sean's saying it's worse. They gave this guy one of the biggest goalkeeping contracts in the MLS as a 39-year-old with absolutely no pressure. No one else was signing this guy, and certainly no one was signing him for this kind of money. I assume they've already doubled that. He signed a new contract for next year, which I'm assuming is going to be for a similar salary into
It
next
won't be
season at
less.
age 40.
Why would he take less?
You're right. It's just unbelievable that this happened. And by the way, again, they made this decision. Like, he was going to be the number one goalkeeper for them.
Drake Callender was supposed to be gone.
With Drake Callender on the roster. Drake Callender was supposed to be gone.
Yeah, he was supposed to be gone. That is more than clear now. And just to preface, Scotty has run through this entire thing. I have not seen this, so this is the first time I'm actually hearing about a lot of these contract situations. And for me, this is completely baffling. It makes zero sense for Inter Miami to give a 38-year-old goalkeeper better contract conditions than a World Cup winning goalkeeper playing for the LAFC. A goalkeeper who wasn't even supposed to be here last season. A goalkeeper who was never supposed to be the number one choice. And I understand he's had good performances, but I can put up twice as many good performances that Drake Callender had for Inter Miami over the time that he's been with us here. And the fact that Drake Callender is earning less than 38-year-old Oscar Stadi, who is at the end of his career, who wouldn't be playing for any other big team in the Americas if it weren't for Inter Miami offering him this level of contract. I think if you were Callender, there's no surprise that he is unwilling to play for this team anymore. And
Drake's okay. Let's put the Drake thing to rest. Drake is hurt.
Yeah.
He has been hurt since January. He got hurt with the U.S. men's national team. They misdiagnosed it for a long time, and that's why it felt like he was back and forth because what they were looking at was healed, but that wasn't the problem. He should be on his way to getting healthy now after getting the surgery, but you're right. He was supposed to be gone. He was supposed to be gone, and it was going to be Ustari's game. And Rocco is the backup. And by the way, that's still probably the plan. I don't know why they signed Will Yarbrough. They gave him $150,000. which I know he's an American, so he doesn't cost international rosters a lot, but completely unnecessary because they were able to register Drake for the Club World Cup even though he was injured. This goalkeeping decision really baffles me because the whole benefit of Ustadi was that he was like cheap and easy and added to the
And he's
flexibility of the
using an
roster.
international roster spot as well. So, yes, we can buy that. But the fact that he's being paid that level of salary, that's just, it doesn't make sense because you're skewing the market. You can find so many better goalkeepers for that price level. And I don't think Ustari is a top 5 goalkeeper in the league right now. He's not.
Again,
um,
he's getting paid more
maybe
than
even maybe even not top 10. I don't know.
he's making more money than Hugo Lloris, who has won the World Cup and played for 10 years in the Premier, like who is certified way better than Oscar Ustadi. It's just a ludicrous decision. And as we get through some of these these conversations, like it's just going to show me why I don't think this front office is prepared to make the necessary moves going into this summer transfer window or really for the rest of the Lionel Messi era with the current brass. Now, I do want to clarify there is a new sporting director from the guy that made all of these decisions, Raul Sanyehi. I don't know if that makes you feel any better because most of these signings looked like Javier Mascherano decisions, if I'm being totally honest with you. So like if as long as Mascherano's there, I don't think any sporting director makes a much of a difference. Drake Callender, 455,000 is like a starting goalkeeper salary. He was on like 300,000 last year, so he got a nice bonus. They wanted to move him this summer, but if you're talking about getting good, solid play, that's a pretty good contract to have on your team as a goalkeeper, especially if you don't take up an international roster slot. This is just an incredibly bizarre decision that they've gone with, and you do wonder what sort of biases or naivete from the front office or Javier Mascherano went into making this decision. I mean, on the surface, there's just so many red flags about this that it kind of baffles me that, maybe you could justify this for like a goalkeeper you think is going to be one of the best goalkeepers in the league, maybe a guy you think is going to be your cornerstone captain that it helps you transition to the next phase of Inter Miami play. But that's not what Ustadi is. So the fact that this is real blows my mind.
I love the way you said naivety. Thank you for that. That made me feel good.
Naivete is a different word.
Naivety. Huh.
Okay. You want to hear the next one?
Yes, please. Hit me with more.
Cello Wiegand, $734,000. Last year he was on $400,000. This is getting to be about what DeAndre Yedlin was making at Inter Miami last season, or would have made last season if he had stayed with the club. The reason they moved on from DeAndre Yedlin is because he had a big contract. Cello Wiegand now has that same contract. If this is what you were going to have to pay Cello Wiegand, there was absolutely no reason to bring him back for a second year on loan. They absolutely can't buy this player, especially if this is the type of money he's going to be making. And the fact they've done it, and it was one of the first decisions they made of the entire offseason, is, again, ludicrous. You have the biggest and best recruiting tool in the world, and that's coming to play with Lionel Messi. And you've chosen to play it safe with guys that are mediocre at this level, average at this level. And you're giving them contracts that you had to clear up from players that had established that they were already there. And you've now taken away your flexibility moving forward, especially the goalkeeping position, to improve the roster because Ustari's gotten that contract for next year already. It's just crazy. This is what DeAndre Yedlin was making in Inter Miami.
You know how we said that this team doesn't seem to have the same level of depth? Now we understand why.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to recruit that level of quality because we've been wasting our money on players that are bang average. You have a potential superstar sitting on the bench for you in that right back role, and yet you're playing average MLS quality Cello Wigan. I'm sorry, I have nothing against Cello as such, but he's average. He would be average on any other MLS team. He wouldn't stand out. You're paying that much for him makes zero sense when you have the level of quality in Ian Frey just sitting on the bench, honestly rotting. And not even that, the fact that DeAndre Yedlin got let go because the argument was that we need somebody who's cheaper. You've basically gone back to the same situation that you were 1 year ago. What's the difference now? How are you maneuvering the pieces and the
He's
levers
Argentine.
that you had?
The difference is he's from Argentina. That's it. Again, last year he made 400K. And so if you're thinking to yourself, okay, you need you need two right backs because Ian Frey is you need two right backs anyways, but Ian Frey is an injury prone player. Like having Cello Wigan as a good solid 400K
That would be fine.
depth piece that can start for you is fine. Now you're paying him almost double that. You're paying him to be one of the best right backs in the league, and
No
he's
wonder.
absolutely not close to that.
No wonder Javi Mascherano is compelled to start these players because you're paying them so much money. They are considered your starters.
He was part of the decision making process to turn the roster into this. So yeah, again, like you could have gotten another player on loan from Argentina that was going to be making 350K, and that could have been your right back, and he could have given you just as much Cello Wigan. Again, Cello Wigan was a third string player for Boca Juniors. This is not a guy that would be difficult to replace. The benefit of having him was that he was a depth piece that was pretty healthy, consistently healthy, and he was very cheap. That was the benefit of having him. The decision that he's on $734,000 is crazy to me. And by the way, like you said, you can't buy him because if you buy him, he's going to want to raise, and you're going to be talking about paying Boca Juniors a transfer fee and then the amortization of that on top of a 750, 800K salary. This player is not worth that in this context, in this salary cap league at all. Like it's not even close. And again, it just goes to the poor decision-making of this front office. And then we can get to the big one.
Get me to the big one already, please.
I
already missed the gold and white graphics, man. Those were so much more fun. I don't want to talk about all of this. This puts me in a bad mood. I can't go back to being in the MLS again. Anyways, Gonzalo Lujan. You say the word, and if I think it is what it is, I'm going to log off and let you finish off the rest of the conversation.
Gonzalo Lujan's making $820,000. He's the highest paid center back on the team. He's making more than Kamal Miller, 75% more than Toto Aviles, 56% more than Maxi Falcone. And by the way, you did pay a transfer fee for him. So this is a guy taking up over $1 million on your cap budget. Now, in comparison to Stadi and Cello, I will give this a little bit of a break because they hadn't seen him in MLS. Like we knew what Cello and Ustadi were in the MLS, but the guys that gave Lujan this contract to be the number one center back on this team, they gave him that's what they're paying him, to be the number one center back on the team. And not just the best center back on the team, but one of the premier center backs in the league. And he doesn't belong in this league. Like he doesn't fill a role Ryan Saylor can't fill.
We won 2 games out of 6 when Lujan was starting in defense. He's going to be on this roster for the end of days because we're not going to be able to find somebody who pays the same wages as we are paying him.
You ready for this? Of the players that aren't in a special category, so if you're not including the DPs and the U22 DPs, you've got Luis Suarez, Tadeo Allende, and then Lujan's the third highest earner.
We let Gresso and Robert Taylor go because we couldn't afford to pay them anymore.
We have to let David Martinez go because we can't afford to pay him.
And he's 10 times better than Lujan. I'm sorry, this doesn't need to be a Lujan bashing conversation, but there's no universe in the world that I'd be willing to pay that much for Lujan. None.
The reason why it's worth saying is because these are the same people who gave these contracts out, the same people who decided that Lujan was worth this. I mean, the way they're paying him is to be the centerpiece of their defense for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
When we brought him in, you and I did some research on him, and we both agreed that this is a great third choice centre back that
Yeah,
plays from time to time and could potentially fill in as right back.
yeah.
The fact that he was brought in to be the number one centre back, not Maxi Falcon. There was a reason Maxi Falcon wasn't starting when he first came on the roster, because he was not meant to start. So the fact that Gonzalo Lujan was brought in to be the number one centre back in front of Toto Aviles, in front of Maxi Falcon, in front of Noah Allen, in front of Darwin Martinez, in front of Ian Frey, my blood is boiling. I'm already in a bad mood again. And it is inexplicable. This kind of decision making is what ruins clubs. And I think if we're not careful and if we make similar decisions in the coming transfer window, we're going to be stuck with deadwood players who we can't offload because we're paying too much money for them. And I agree there's the caveat of they never saw Lujan in the MLS, but you've seen enough tape of him to understand what talent level translates. You got world class scouts and analysts to tell you how
Well, we
different
don't know if they
leagues
have that.
translate into.
No, this is no. Stop. This is a Javier Mascherano decision.
Yeah, this is
This is his guy.
absolutely
He
is.
brought him to the Olympics when he didn't belong at the Olympics. Like, this is Javier Mascherano's guy, and he wanted him to be the centerpiece of his defense. And this guy's not ready to be an MLS. He's not that he's not ready. He's not good enough to be an MLS player, or certainly not a starter. Certainly not a starter on a team with championship aspirations. This is a terrible contract. It is the longest contract on this team, if I'm not mistaken. And it's one that, if Javier Mascherano leaves, that the next coach is going to be desperate to get rid of. It's just a disaster. This is a disaster of a contract. And we're just getting started with it.
The worst of the lot. There's more? There can't surely be more.
No. That was the worst. That's the worst contract.
Okay, thank God.
There's a couple others that I thought. Well, and the reason why I want to mention is because it's the people that made that decision are the people that are going to be making the decisions on bringing in a new center back to replace
the
David
next
Martinez.
transfer decisions.
They're going to be trying to bring in new wingers to replace Robert Taylor and Julian Gressel, who they never needed to sell. And I think there's another. There's a positive but scary inference about these contracts that I also think we need to get into. I will run through a couple other things that are worth noting. Jordi Alba, $6 million this year. So he's a DP. They cannot sign another DP this summer. That's off the table. Absolutely. Redondo making $837,000. It's okay because he fits under the U22 slot, so it doesn't count that much. But that will make it a little bit harder to actually sell him because the team he goes to is going to have to be willing to match that. So if you can move him to a liga like a La Liga club in Spain, like, they'll match that. But you are limiting your options a little bit because he's a defensive midfielder, not a striker, a winger, a goal scorer. Fafa Bico, $642,000. We wondered if we would get something of a hometown discount. Doesn't really appear to be the case, which is fine. I mean, Fafa Bico is a good player, but worth noting.
Needs to be used more if you're paying him that much.
Talasco Segovia, $335,000. Baltasar Rodriguez, $440,000, which shows me that they don't think he's like a star.
But also the fact that Segovia is earning that much, and then Baltasar's Jesus.
No, I know. And like, none of those are problems with the roster. Just, I thought they imply things about how the team feels about those players.
There's also a dissonance in the way we were viewing this roster and the way the front office views this roster. And that's probably why we were so frustrated with the decision making when it comes to team selection and all of that. Now it all starts to make sense, because the way we thought certain players were being brought in to be number ones, that wasn't the case. Whereas the other players who we thought would be depth pieces are actually the number ones. So it's all starting to contextualize and make a lot more sense now than it did three months ago. And that's scary because I don't like that implication. It's not fun.
Yeah. Let me tell you the scary thing for the long-term future. And it's positive, but it's scary. Ian Frey is making 150K this year. He's on the last year of his contract. No Allen, 126,000. Yannick Bright is the second lowest earner on the team, 83,000. Leo Alfonso, the only one making less than him.
Apologies, Scotty's been going through a bout of cough, which he has confirmed to me is not illness, but in fact allergies. So he's going to be fine.
Yannick Bright is the second lowest earner on this team, 83,000. Those three players, Noah Allen, Ian Frey, and Yannick Bright, are going to be in for big contracts, raises moving into next season. I don't think you can keep. Well, Ian Frey's out of contract. I don't think you can keep.
I think
Yannick
Ian
Bright
Frey
as
is
the second
gone.
lowest. I don't think you can keep Yannick Bright as the second lowest paid player on this team, considering his impact. And to give you an idea, the contract Kramaski's on this year is for $500,000. So you're talking about upping those guys to $500,000 each, which is A, takes them off the supplemental roster onto the senior roster, and B, again, is just going to further limit your flexibility. Now, some of those guys might get a move abroad, and that's not a negative because those are young players that deserve new big contracts. Noah Allen's been incredible. Yannick Bright's been incredible. Ian Frey is certainly earned a new contract. But it's just you're really running out of flexibility here. And so when I said at the beginning of this podcast that I think we've reached the peak of Inter Miami under Lionel Messi, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the only way you can really handle this is if you clear everything out and start again, because I think to refresh this team, you need your DP spots, which means Busquets isn't coming back. The Jordi Alba decision, I don't know what his new contract is. So maybe there'll be some relief there going into next season. But Luis Suarez, all these guys, I think you have to really reset the roster soon. And that's either going to be with your young players that came through the academy that you spent a lot of time and resources developing, or it's going to be with guys like Lujan and Chelo Wigan. And I can't imagine a world where the fans are into that idea. And I think if we're in a world next year with Chelo Wigan's on this roster and Ian Frey's not, it's like an absolute curse on this club.
Travesty. Yeah.
It's a travesty. So I think there was a lot to be learned about this, and almost all of it's negative. Again, Kramaski making $500,000, that's awesome. Like he was spectacular. He got that new contract last season. That's what you want from the kids coming out of your academy, and I want that for Ian Frey. I want that for Noah Allen. I want that for Yannick Bright. And you got to move on, Chelo Wigan and Gonzalo Lujan, to have space for those guys. And instead, you've given those guys huge contracts. So the way the team is operating right now, from a financial perspective, it's wild to me. I saw some people mention,
and it does set a precedence as well. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it sets a very dangerous precedence, because now the players that you bring in, they've seen the kind of salaries that some of these players are earning, and their agents are going to just ramp up those negotiations and be like,
I don't think you have to worry about that in the MLS as much.
I hope
that's
not. But
more of a biggest money in the Europe kind of thing.
No, but it's not about the transfer fee, but the salaries that some of these players demand.
It's the same, but I understand what you're saying. I don't think it's as big of a deal as it would be in Europe. One of the things that I want to bring in is these guys coming from Argentina are making good money, and so you have to pay them good money to bring them here. And if you get a guy from the bottom of the Portuguese division, first division, like Talasco Segovia, you don't have to pay him nearly as much. So it's, again, our obsession with going to Argentina is not helping this team grow into the future. One last player I should mention is Alan Obando. His contract is $527,000, which implies that he's right in there with the Toto Avilases and the Kramaskis, as a guy, maybe not as a locked-in starter, but a guy who should be playing more. So they're paying him to be a guy that plays more. So make of that what you will.
Well, it's been great being on such high, and thank you for bringing me back to reality, Scotty.
Do you think the team needs like a total reset?
Oh,
It's weird to
absolutely.
say, but this doesn't look pretty. I'll put it
No,
that
it
way.
doesn't look pretty. And I think less so about what it means for this season, but I think just the long term implications of how this club is being handled and where we're going with this club is what I think concerns me even more so. The talent scouting has been subpar for this season. This is how it's going to proceed as long as the coach is there. I think the salaries that you're giving some of these players are completely unacceptable compared to what they bring to the table and their role on this team and what it should be. It makes a lot of sense for the way some decisions have been made about the team selection and how we're seeing certain players on the pitch more so than other players. And I think our frustrations have been sort of validated, and now there's a context behind it. But I think it's going to be a long road ahead for when Inter Miami wants to get back to the level that we were last season, which I thought Inter Miami did brilliantly to get to that level. I don't know if we ever get to that level.
I think when you see this, you start to see the impact that Chris Henderson and Tata
Yeah.
Martino had shaping this roster and how good they were at that. Getting guys at the right contracts, getting guys at the right contract lengths. One of the things that we stopped seeing this offseason was flexibility built into this roster. Last season, they were able to, they just had so much flexibility, and they just stopped doing that this year for some reason. Well, because they had different people in charge. Tata Martino's eye for talent and his scouting network clearly was better than what um, we have going for us at the moment. And so, as we talk about rejuvenating this season, they're going to want to bring in two forwards, wingers. They're going to want to bring in a new center back to replace David Martinez. And I don't have a lot of faith in the people in charge of doing this. So, to go back to how we started this episode, Messi can't leave this team, because if he leaves the team in a state like this, he's not going to be loved in South Florida, and that's not going to be a good position for him um,
When he takes
to be
charge of
the
the
owner of
club.
Inter
Yeah.
Miami. And so he needs to be a part of making it right, or taking this to a level that it hasn't gone to yet, which is winning the MLS Cup and winning the CONCACAF Champions Cup next year and qualifying for the next club. Like, the checklist hasn't been made if you're going to sort of put the club into this sort of position. If we're talking about potentially losing homegrown players because we can't afford them, because we brought in a bunch of Argentines, because we brought in a coach who loves Argentines because he's your friend, and a front office guy that's your friend, that you know, that you're comfortable with, like, you have a responsibility to be a part of working through this into the next stage. So, the bright side, Messi is not going anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think he is, but well, let's hope he can carry us into the future just the way he does in the pitch as well. Because boy, we need it.
Okay, guys. Is there anything else that we need to talk about? Oh, well, we can just bring it up. Some people are mentioning Velasco Segovia has an offer from Real Betis. We don't know if that's legit or not. I'd be shocked if the club sells him this summer, but I think similar to Diego Gomez last year, I can see them sort of coming to an agreement with Betis about how to replace him. They got a big money move from a midfielder in Johnny Cardoso, an American defensive midfielder. So they have money to spend on a midfielder, but I don't know if they're willing to wait till January. So we'll see how that story develops. Velasco Segovia is an excellent player. He's not going to be in the MLS for more than a year and a half. So, if it's a year, that's great. But either way, like, he's going to be like Diego Gomez in the sense that we can use him as a recruiting pitch to get the next guy, because we will now have shown that we can bring guys in and develop them for a year and then let them go to that big dream move moving forward. So, I don't know, any thoughts on Segovia?
No, I think he's definitely going to go sooner rather than later. It's just a matter of when and where. Brilliant player, and we should enjoy him while we can.
So, we're not coming back this week because you're going on vacation.
Very
At least there's no
excited for
plan.
that.
There's no plan to come back. So our next episode will be 1 hour before kickoff on Saturday, before the Inter Miami Montreal game. How are you feeling about not recording for the next 5 days, 6 days? How are you feeling about Inter Miami going back to the MLS? And give us some final wrap-up words that we can use to inspire us to rejuvenate what this season could be.
I don't know if I have inspirational words after that conversation, but what I will say is we're going back to the MLS. We will expect to win every single game, or at least people will expect us to win every single game. And now we're no longer the underdogs. The one good thing is that come that game against Montreal, I'll get to do the pre-game show from the beach, and at least I can have a nice pina colada in my hand, and that will put me in a good mood. So that for me is a positive development. As for not recording for the next 5 days, I think it's good to take a step back, think about the context of the future, and just relax a little bit before we get back into the grind of a lot of games over the next month. There's a lot of football to talk about. There's a lot more to come. Some of it may be really positive, some of it may be negative. We'll see. Stick around like you guys have always done with us. Thank you so much for showing the support of the Club World Cup. We tried to do a few new things over the course of the last 3 weeks. We'll continue to try and innovate as long as you guys are interested and as long as you guys keep watching. And as always, it's a pleasure to do this with you, Scotty, and it's a pleasure to have everyone listening in and watching and commenting and interacting with us, because that's what makes this so special, positive or negative. At the end of the day, we get to do this as a community, and that for me is the biggest gift. So thank you to everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Guys, we will see you next time. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your evening. And don't get too sad because the Herons play soccer in 6 days. Till next time, guys, enjoy. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.